Tonight, the president's political woes.
The FBI never investigated this allegation.
Biden gets a boost after an FBI source integral to the House GOP's impeachment push is charged with providing false information about the president and his son. Plus, death in a Russian prison.
Whatever story they tell, let us be clear, Russia is responsible.
Russia claims Putin's imprisoned political opponent, Alexei Navalny, is dead. And over a year after a toxic train derailment, the president visits East Palestine, Ohio. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A top Putin rival dead in prison. Welcome to Faith Nation from our studio in Washington. I'm Caitlin Burke. Alexei Navalny, a jailed opposition leader and Russian President Vladimir Putin's fiercest foe, is said to have died in prison. Russia's Federal Penitentiary Service writing in a statement today that Navalny, quote, felt unwell after a walk, almost immediately losing consciousness, and that medical workers declared him dead after attempting to revive him. At the White House today, President Biden called the reported death another sign of Putin's brutality and said Putin is responsible for it.
We don't know exactly what happened, but there is no doubt that the death of Navalny was a consequence of something that Putin and his thugs did.
Navalny was serving a 30-plus-year jail sentence. He appeared healthy just yesterday, laughing and cracking jokes while addressing a Russian court via video link from an Arctic penal colony. The well-known Putin critic survived poisoning with a military nerve agent while on a business trip to Russia in 2020. An attempt on his life Navalny blamed on Putin. Joining me now is Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow and Director of Research and Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Michael, news of Navalny's death comes as the Kremlin is preparing to orchestrate another election victory for Putin in March. What do you make of the timing?
Hi, Caitlin. Well, I don't know if the timing is intentional. Putin's going to win the election either way, whether Navalny's dead or not. This is just the last person who, as you pointed out, was still Putin's fiercest critic, but the last of his various dissidents and critics of this profile to still be active. So Putin had pretty much defeated any and all serious democratic opposition, I'd say somewhere in the range of 10 to 15 years ago. And there was not much political risk to him, even had Navalny been running for that matter, because Putin's managed to use all the organs of the state against his opponents to basically level false allegations, to discredit them, to put them behind bars, to kill them, as with Boris Nemtsov, who was a dissident, killed a decade ago or so. So Putin really had managed to create almost a mafia-like quasi-democracy with just a veneer of elections. They may actually, in some sense, be true elections, but there's never a doubt about the outcome because anybody who would really oppose Putin is either dead or in prison or discredited.
Do you think there's any chance that new political opposition could arise, or with this death, are they really just totally deterred here?
I don't think there's any serious chance in the next few months, certainly not before the election. You know, the Washington Post today reran an op-ed that Navalny had written 2 years ago, and Navalny explained the nature of this sort of Russian machine, this machine of propaganda and suppression of dissent and dictatorship, really. I think at this point, Russia is more of a dictatorship than China. Because Putin is the only person who's making decisions, the only person who has any political standing on his own, whereas at least Xi Jinping tries to get some support from his fellow Communist Party members. So I don't see any plausible basis for a candidate emerging. And of course, Putin has even found a way to make the war against Ukraine tolerable, or even in some quarters of Russia popular, describing it as a fight that's provoked by the West against a Nazi regime, all these falsehoods that he's managed to level. And because the news media is so dominated by his cronies, that's all that Russians typically hear. So no, I don't see any way that an opposition emerges anytime soon, and certainly not in the next few weeks.
All right, Michael O'Hanlon with the Brookings Institution. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Moving on to another global conflict, the war in Gaza is intensifying, even as the U.S. and its Arab partners work on a blueprint for establishing a Palestinian state in the case of a ceasefire. But as CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl reports, that's a non-starter for Israel.
After a call with President Biden, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu again rejected the idea of recognizing a Palestinian state. Posting on X, formerly known as Twitter, he summed up his opposition in 2 sentences. Israel categorically rejects international dictates regarding a permanent settlement with the Palestinians. Such an arrangement will be reached only through direct negotiations between the parties without preconditions. Israel will continue to oppose the unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. Such recognition in the wake of the October 7th massacre would give a huge reward to unprecedented terrorism and prevent any future peace settlement. The plan would include many steps rejected by Israel in the past, including evacuating many communities in the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, along with a Palestinian capital in eastern Jerusalem, and a combined government for the West Bank and Gaza. Israeli government spokesman Avi Hyman said, "It's not time to speak about the day after the war ends."
Now is not the time to be speaking about gifts for the Palestinian people at a time when the Palestinian Authority themselves have yet to even condemn the October 7th massacre. Now is the time for victory, total victory against Hamas. All discussions of the day after Hamas will be had the day after Hamas.
Meanwhile, Israel criticized a United Nations official who told Sky News that despite its acts of terror, Hamas is not a terror organization, which is a position held by the UN.
I think it's very difficult. And as you say, I've worked with many different terrorist and insurgent groups. Hamas is not a terrorist group for us, of course, as you know. It's a political movement.
Posting on X, Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan blasted Griffiths, saying, "You are no humanitarian. Sadly, you are a terror collaborator." Also, Netanyahu and other senior Israeli officials met with CIA Director William Burns in Tel Aviv to discuss talks for the release of the hostages. The prime minister earlier refused to send a delegation to Cairo for talks on Thursday until Hamas lessened its demands. Families of the hostages chained themselves together at the entrance to the defense ministry, calling for the war cabinet to send a delegation to Cairo. And in Gaza, IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari explained Israel's military mission in the Nasser hospital in Gaza, where Israeli intelligence believed bodies and hostages were being held.
According to the information we have collected, I can now share some of the terrorists who took part in the massacre of October 7th. They were found by our forces inside the Nasser hospital complex. If it weren't for Hamas starting this war, taking our hostages and hiding in the hospital, we wouldn't need to be in the hospital in the first place. Hamas started this war. Israel will end this war.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
A major defeat in court today for Donald Trump, with a New York judge finding the former president liable in a civil fraud trial. Trump was accused of a years-long scheme to dupe banks and others by inflating his wealth. With this guilty verdict, he's been ordered to pay a penalty of more than $350 million. He's also now barred from doing business in New York for 3 years. Trump is expected to appeal at least the financial penalty. After months of speculation, the man considered most likely to disrupt President Biden's re-election bid is stepping aside. Senator Joe Manchin announced today that he will not enter the 2024 presidential race. The West Virginia Democrat said, quote, "Democracy is at stake," adding that it's not the right time for a third-party bid. New information in the Republican impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden. An FBI informant now faces charges of fabricating a multi-million-dollar bribery scheme involving the president and his son Hunter. The allegations concerned a Ukrainian energy company, a claim central to the Republicans' case. CBN News Washington correspondent Hillary Powell joins us now with more. Hillary?
Well, Hunter Biden's attorney told the Associated Press the charges show the probe is based on dishonest, uncredible allegations and witnesses. And President Joe Biden is calling out this informant's alleged lies.
He is lying, and it should be dropped, and it's just been an outrageous effort from the beginning.
Pointed words from the president for a man accused of repeatedly lying about the first family. An indictment from special counsel David Weiss shows FBI confidential informant Alexander Smirnov is charged with making false statements and obstruction of justice. Weiss writes Smirnov lied to the FBI in 2020, saying executives associated with Ukrainian business Burisma paid Hunter and Joe Biden $5 million each in 2015 or 2016, only after Biden announced his bid for the presidency. Smirnov told his handler an executive claimed to have hired Hunter Biden to protect us through his dad from all kinds of problems. House Republicans have repeatedly cited claims against President Biden, like House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer of Kentucky in September 2023. The same month, the FBI says it decided to re-question the informant to check his credibility.
We also found a Form 1023, an FBI form alleging Joe Biden took a bribe. And what we learned from this is the FBI never investigated this allegation.
Ranking Democrat Congressman Jamie Raskin is calling for an end to what he calls a doomed impeachment inquiry. Also part of Republicans' broad impeachment probe, President Biden's mishandling of classified documents. The Associated Press reports House Republicans are planning to question special counsel Robert Hur next month about those comments that President Biden has a poor memory. The incident raised questions over Biden's mental fitness. The White House is assuring he'll soon be evaluated for his health as protocol.
He will have one. He will have it. He will have obviously a physical. We will be transparent, just like we have been in the last 2 years.
The House Judiciary Committee will hear from her as soon as March 12th. Now, as for the impeachment inquiry, GOP House Oversight Committee members posted to social media X that they seek to continue the investigation, calling the FBI corrupt.
Thanks, Hillary. The latest inflation report defying expectations. What that means for your wallet after this. Americans are paying the price for rising inflation, and the latest report is worse than expected. From the grocery store to housing and transportation, prices are still high. The Consumer Price Index showing an increase of 3.1% in January compared to a year ago, with grocery prices alone up 25% since January of 2020, just before the coronavirus pandemic. Joining me now to talk about it, Mark Hamrick, the Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate. Mark, what do you make of the latest inflation report? Is it all bad news? What were economists predicting?
I think you're on the right track, Caitlin. Good to be with you. It was disappointing, but not all of the news about inflation broadly is bad news. And I think that's probably among the most important things to point out here, that we are seeing inflation trends improve in terms of month over month and year over year changes, just not as fast as we would like. But here's an important point. It has come faster than central bankers and most economists had thought it would. So I think what that all boils down to is prices are still high. We're not expecting prices to crash. The prices of goods are coming down, but the price of services remain elevated. That really is where the tension is, and all of that is setting up for a better interest rate environment in the second half of the year.
Okay. So the latest weekly jobs report shows new unemployment claims are down, another marker of a strong labor market. Does that give the Fed room to keep interest rates high?
The Fed does not want to keep interest rates overly restrictive. And as inflation comes down, it needs to bring its benchmark interest rate down eventually as well. And so the expectation now, and obviously it can change because the data changes, but we do think that the Fed will be cutting interest rates in the second half of the year. The key is whether the Fed remains too restrictive or just enough without damaging the job market. And I think that is a valid concern, but we certainly haven't seen it in the unemployment data. The claims, as you mentioned, remain historically low. And at last check, the unemployment rate nationally was 3.7%.
All right, switching gears a little bit on you here. The commercial real estate sector. What do you make of the speculation that there could be a commercial real estate crash on the horizon?
Well, the question really, Caitlin, is what is the exposure of the nation's banks, particularly regional or smaller banks, to what is undoubtedly a correction going on in that marketplace and the value of commercial real estate, essentially offices, coming down. And that's happening in real time. Banking regulators are on the case, they tell us. They are in touch with financial institutions to make sure that there is not systemic risk. But there's no doubt that some losses are going to be written down, are being taken right now, because offices aren't as important as they used to be. One of the interesting things about commercial real estate really is, after people have been talking about the demise of brick and mortar retail, that's as strong as ever. And essentially that part of the economy is maxed out. Essentially, much retail space is being utilized, and what gets vacated gets gobbled up very quickly. So it's not all bad news in commercial real estate.
All right, Mark Hamrick, we appreciate your insights as always. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
When we come back, the president heads to East Palestine, Ohio, marking 1 year since the toxic train derailment. Welcome back. President Biden is visiting Ohio today, just 1 year after a freight train carrying toxic materials derailed near the small town of East Palestine. Thousands of pounds of hazardous chemicals were released, sparking serious health and environmental concerns. Today, Biden will hear from local officials on recovery efforts and the continued response. CBN's Brody Carter reported in the days following this spill, speaking with locals who banded together in the aftermath.
This is a heavy-duty gas mask. We brought it just for safety. On the other side of this building are the train tracks. That's where they're digging up the soil, and you can really smell a burning rubber, a chlorine scent that's in the air. Over here, families forced to endure that smell, and it's ridiculous to think that they'd have to wear a gas mask just to protect their families. What do you smell?
To me, it smells like kind of like a burning plastic.
Smelling odors doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have health effects.
Health concerns, how, are we safe? We don't know.
As you can imagine, talk around East Palestine, Ohio remains centered on February's derailment and chemical spill.
We're estimating somewhere between 60 and 100,000 tons of contaminated material are going to come out of that area. So it's significant.
You could just see the flames. They were higher than the house when they evacuated us.
About half of the town's 5,000 residents evacuated after the accident due to a catastrophic failure in the train car's overheated wheel bearing.
And so really this is kind of a miracle that it happened where it did.
Concerns remain centered around the safety of drinking water, air quality, and contaminated soil. The fear of the unknown, however, could be the biggest worry here in East Palestine.
I look at my son and his wife who just bought their house and are raising the grandchildren, and I just wonder, is this a good place for them to raise them now?
Those who want to leave can't, because trying to sell a home or business has become so difficult.
We've been here 17 years.
Dwayne Doyle, owner of Doyle's Fresh Meat and Deli, knows the frustration all too well. He had planned to sell the shop and retire with his wife. Then the unexpected happened.
They were just afraid of the unknown, and so they decided not to do it.
This is as close as we can get to the actual train derailment. You can see behind me more than 2 months later, Norfolk Southern and the EPA working together to clean the ground soil next to the train tracks. Locals tell me if this would have happened any closer to the town center, it would have been much more devastating.
By the grace of God that nobody was killed or hurt, and I hope that in the long run, it works out for the town.
Only now, it's a waiting game to measure the long-term impact of dangerous chemicals left behind in the air, water, and soil.
There was over 900,000 pounds of vinyl chloride in this railcar. It's our job to make sure that anything that may be left behind are not at levels that could ever be a health concern to residents or to the ecology in the area.
The EPA will be on site for months, helping clean and monitor toxins, while shipping contaminated soil and water to deep well injection sites.
We inject the contaminants several miles into the earth that will never be accessed again by human hands.
Just want my kid to be able to drink out of the hose one day. Folks like Zachary Schultz are looking for long-term solutions for the people who live here.
This covers your whole house. We just don't have the research to be able to tell you that it's at a safe level to drink it.
Schultz is working with a nearby church to use an anonymous donation from Texas to buy and install roughly 70 carbon water filtration systems for homes in the affected area.
We saw this as an open door for God to do something and for us to tangibly love those people that are around us.
Yeah, we don't drink a whole lot from the faucet directly.
Sue and Randy Dunlap are one of the families getting a filter. While there's no guarantee it can remove all contamination, they hope some protection is better than nothing.
You don't know what you don't know. You just got to make a choice and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
For some, this has become a crisis of uncertainty due to the long-term impact of the derailment and spill. Pastor Saveco, though, sees a resilient community leaning on their faith that God will heal their land. As East Palestine residents look toward the future, he seeks to reassure them that God is their refuge and strength, ever present in times of trouble.
Houses can be replaced, jobs can be replaced, but people, family, relationships can't. And through all of this, there hasn't been one loss of life. And so that's just incredible in and of itself. So I think that's a focal point where people are readjusting their values.
Reporting in East Palestine, Ohio, Brody Carter, CBN News.
Still ahead, a slam dunk for sportsmanship. Next on Faith Nation. Finally tonight, the manager of an Ohio high school basketball team received a moment in the spotlight this week. Middletown High School senior Luke Atkinson has been with the boys basketball team for 4 years. On the night of the senior game, Luke, who has Down syndrome, finally got his chance to get on the court. Both teams agreeing he should not only be in the starting lineup, but also score the first basket. After a couple of attempts, Luke made the shot, receiving a standing ovation as he walked off the court and a framed jersey after the game. Sounds like a great way to honor someone who is clearly important to his community. That is going to do it for Faith Nation. Have a great weekend.